Thank you, everyone, for coming. I really appreciate it. And welcome to the second ever Talon Talks event, as Brian said. I am a senior here at UT Tyler, and I'm also a producer for KTK. I've been working there for about 3 years now, and I am a mass communication student. Before we begin anything, I do want to point out, I guess, let everybody know who put this all together. Miss Bonnie Davis and also Victoria Vorsis. Without them, give them a big round of applause. They work with the Patriot Talon, and they work with the Patriot Talon, and they put all of this together. So thank you guys, and also Bruno's Pizza, who provided this delicious food, as well as Proforma, who did the shirts that you see all these Patriot Talon people wearing. And just to briefly explain what is going to be going on today, first of all, if you look at your tables, you see these poll cards. And what we're going to be doing is we're going to be having you guys chime in y'all's thoughts on the stance on these issues. And by doing that, you can see your cards on the table. And as Brian mentioned, you just text in to that number. There's a code on there, and you just text in that number. And here in a little bit, we're going to be pulling up live polls. And your stance is completely anonymous, and your stance will be we'll pull the audience and just check and see where everybody is on this issue. And also, I just want to talk a little bit about what we're going to be doing here today. If you've noticed, there are several topics in the country, and these are topics that divide it, very controversial topics. One of those being legalization of marijuana, the other one, legalization of gay marriage. And now, you turn on the TV, and whenever these topics are discussed, it's more of an arguing, yelling. Just people yelling, and it becomes a shouting match, and who can yell the loudest. What we want to do is we want to take it from being, I'm right, you're wrong, to being, here is what I believe, and here's why I believe this. And by doing that, it not only starts a conversation, but it will also either inform those who may not know about a topic, or it may just spark a new idea or a new stance that you may not have thought of. And so, I guess without further ado, I'm going to just briefly explain kind of the structure for everybody. I will be introducing our two candidates, and the first topic we will be discussing is the legalization of marijuana. And each person will get 5 minutes to briefly explain, opening statement, and then we will ask them a question, and we'll have 2 minutes for their question. And then we will also ask a question that you from the audience have written down on a piece of paper and we collected, and we'll ask one of those questions as well. And then at the end, they will get a closing statement, and after their closing statements, or I should say while they're giving their closing statements, we'll have you guys text in y'all's stance just to see if maybe y'all might have changed it or if the polling of the room was different than it was before, and that way we can just kind of check and see if this idea of doing it as a conversation maybe spark something different. And I guess without further ado, I would like to introduce our two people. Mr. Sam Cook over here, who is a sophomore here at UT Tyler. He is also a debater on the award-winning debate team here at UT Tyler. And he is a double major in social science as well as mass communication. And he will be for the legalization of marijuana. And over here against it, Mr. Stephen Hullum, who is a sophomore and also part of the award-winning debate team. He is a political science major, and he will be going against legalization of marijuana. And then after that, we will, of course, switch. And I guess without further ado, I would like to turn it over to Mr. Sam Cook for his opening statement.
Hi there. I'm speaking in affirmation of the legalization of marijuana, and with regards to this, it should be dealt with in the realm of public policy. This is an issue that we deal with on a national scale from federal policy versus state policy and the reasons why it should and should not be legalized, which requires a form of cost-benefit analysis, as in there is a cost to legalizing marijuana, there's a cost to having it be illegal, and there are benefits to both sides as well. The cost in this instance, as reported by Jeffrey Mirren, a Harvard University economist in 2010, is approximately $17.5 billion every year to keep marijuana illegal. Despite that, over 90 million individuals within the United States have reporting trying marijuana or actively using marijuana since 2000. That's nearly half the population of the United States, which indicates that we're basically wasting $17.5 billion every single year to keep half of the United States from doing something that they believe they have the ability to do, which means that not only is there a disconnect between the politics of the federal government, state governments, local governments by preventing populations within states or within local communities from doing something that they believe is within their rights, but also simply wasting an economic opportunity. Colorado and Washington recently legalized marijuana and have been using it recreationally and commercially producing it for medical purposes. The benefit that Colorado found in just 1 year was $98 million in tax revenue. That's not sales within the industry. That's the revenue that the government accrued from the sales of marijuana. $40 million of that $98 million was spent constructing high schools. And the benefits of that within the state leads to more education, which allows people to be able to choose whether or not marijuana is good for them, bad for them, something they should and should not do. Additionally, other states have legalized, like I said. Washington, they generated $47.5 million every single year since legalization and are projected to continue on that rate, if not increase it. Maine has had estimates that indicate they would make at least $36 million in tax revenue. Rhode Island, one of the smallest states in the union, has a minimum estimate of $21.6 million in tax revenue and up to $82 million in tax revenue for their education systems, for their government to be able to run. But if you were to legalize that at a federal level, at an estimate as low as the lowest and the smallest state in the union, at $20 million per state, it would equal $1 billion added to the economy, plus the added benefit of dropping the $17.5 billion deficit as it relates to having to spend that every year to keep it illegal. But that number isn't even accurate because the government reported that in the year 2000, Americans spent over $10.2 billion on marijuana. If the American people are willing to spend $10.2 billion on anything, it should probably be legal. I mean, the fact that we have the consumer base and the desire to have those things be legal means that in a realm of public policy, if you were to serve your constituents, you would do what it is they wish. If 50% of the population turned out to vote for every single midterm and every single congressional local election, that would equal the legalization of marijuana by default if those politicians were to follow through with the desire of those individuals, which is an indication that it would be a good thing de facto because people want it to happen. But additionally, Colorado saw a rise of a minimum of 7,500 jobs based on this industry and up to 10,000 jobs within the first year. You spread that across 50 states, and you see 500,000 jobs added to the U.S. economy. Based on cost-benefit analysis, if you are to evaluate whether or not something is net beneficial, just makes sense to legalize marijuana. But even more so, we have other things that were worse than marijuana in the status quo. We allow for alcohol to be drank because it's considered more traditional because it was a European thing that we did way back in the day and then later decided that was bad for us. We also have tobacco that has become more and more poisonous and kills hundreds of thousands of people every year in the United States with literally no reported deaths of overdoses or marijuana-related deaths in the United States. It means that there's no reason that it should still be legal. It was made illegal because of the timber industry advocating against hemp paper, which is a result of the legalization and commercial production of marijuana, which is why I think that it ought to be legal because it was illegalized because of commercial ideology and then continued to be illegal based on lobbyists.
All right. Thank you. Now I'm going to turn it over to Mr. Stephen Hullum, who is going to voice his opinion over why he is against it.
I just want to thank you all for attending. I think it's really great what the Talon's doing, and I hope you all enjoy. I'd also like to thank Sam, who usually I'm debating with, but now I'm debating against, so I'll get right in it. So the first reason why I'm opposed to the legalization of marijuana is that it's addictive. Dr. Drew Pinksy, who you may know as the celebrity Dr. Drew, says that it in fact is addictive. He says that it would be malpractice to say that cannabis is not addictive. Anybody who's experienced it, actually been addicted to it, knows how profound the addiction is. The difficult thing about marijuana addiction is some people, even though they're addicted to it, can do fine with it for many, many years before they start to have a difficulty. But eventually, the high starts to wear off, people start smoking a lot more to try to get that high back, and that's when they descend into difficulties. So basically what he's saying here is that marijuana is a much more pervasive drug. It gives you the thought that you're okay, that you can control yourself, that you're not physically addicted, yet you are devolving into a psychological addiction. You use it as a crutch to get through your hard days or what have you, and that's where the addiction comes in, whereas it differs from a physical addiction of, cocaine, heroin, drugs like that. This brings me to my second point, that the statistics that are coming out of Colorado and Washington about the success of marijuana are not representative of the entire United States. The proponents of marijuana legalization will talk about how it has lowered crime rates, it has built schools by proxy, as Sam says, as well as it has dropped the youth usage rate. However, there are various societal differences that exist in those areas of the United States as well as areas of the United States like our own. Those states have had an existing framework of medical marijuana usage for many years. In fact, Washington legalized it in 1998 and Colorado legalized it in 2000, which means that their youth, their public health sector, their law enforcement officials know how to enforce these sort of laws. Additionally, the regulation has been in place when these sort of dispensaries for many years, which means that they're much more flexible in their ability to address these sort of things. So I guess is what I'm getting at is that if it were to expand here, we would not have the know-how, if you will, to address these sort of things and experience the same success. So it would be impossible to claim that what they're experiencing would be what we would experience. It's just too many, there's just too many variables. Additionally, it brings me to my third point. There's just absolutely no reason to. Sam cites, the economic benefits, but according to the American Medical Association, which reported in November of 2013, it's the most common illicit drug involved in drugged driving, particularly in drivers under the age of 21. Early cannabis use is related to later substance use disorders. There's no reason to legalize this drug to make it more available to those who do not need it. The drug just exists purely as a recreation, which means that there's only a risk that it could make things worse, which means that it should be illegal. While I would be in favor of a decriminalization policy because there are certain medical benefits of marijuana which have been noted, an entire legalization of the drug just makes absolutely no sense, just based purely off of a recreational stance. It just doesn't make any sense. Which brings me to my last point. I've talked a lot about how it makes you think that you're in control of the drug and how we, just want to legalize it for the recreational purposes. But the truth of the matter is that we don't really look at all of the facts. And a long-term study which was performed in New Zealand in 2008 found that people who began smoking marijuana in their teenage years lost an average of 8 IQ points between the ages of 13 and 38. It also goes on to say that those who smoke marijuana in their adult years don't really experience this drop in the IQ points. So what I'm getting at is that there's only a risk that youth would be exposed to this drug more often, and that is the only sector of the population that it will affect. The youth are the only ones that can be hurt by this drug, both in their mental formation, because it can affect your brain growth, which means that they're the only ones that can be affected, which means that there's no reason to do it. How much time?
You have 45 seconds.
That's good.
All right. All right. Now, we decided beforehand, we flipped a coin, and Mr. Cook, you will be getting the first question first. And it's basically 2 states in the U.S. allow the recreational use of marijuana as stated, Colorado and Washington. How would legalization of marijuana in Texas, how would it affect the community, as well as how will it affect the university?
Well, thank you for asking that, because I think that a lot of what has been stated here is based on the local presumptions and the local effects that marijuana would have in Colorado and Washington versus here in Texas. I think that it would have a very similar effect. I know that it has been noted that we don't have the same medical marijuana history and decriminalization process. However, I think that Texas people are very good at ingenuity. We're a very industrial state. We are a very industrial community, very ingenuous community, which means that we would be able to turn those things into economic benefits. You can look to the local revolution of e-cigarettes into vapor smoke. We didn't have any vapor shops in Tyler, and then when it became more popular, you can almost not walk into any room in the university and not find someone with a vapor here, because there's the Uptown Vapor Lounge, there's the 323 Smoke Shop, the local tobacco lounge has a vapor, and my opponent over here, Stephen Hullum, has a vapor. Well, he had one. He used to have one. My other debate friends, Dallas and Carver, have a vapor. It's something that we're able to adapt to economically, is to find ways to exploit things that consumers want. If consumers want oil, we provide oil. If consumers want vapor, we provide vapor. A lot of the things that have been said about how it would affect the community when it results to health have been IQ points and psychological addiction. But there was a study done by the University of London that indicated that from the ages of 8 to 15, the only abuse that actually affected IQ drop versus a 7-year study was the use of alcohol. Even heavy marijuana usage did not result in any drop in IQ points, which means that there's really no medical effects that would happen to the local community or the campus. It would just be an economic benefit.
All right, thank you. All right, Mr. Hullum, same question.
Okay, so in terms of addressing how it would affect the university, I think that, we could look at the university policies and see that since they have banned the use of e-cigarettes, that likely there would be, no direct impact. I don't think that we would see people walking around campus smoking marijuana, things like that. I think that those sort of rules would still be in effect. Now, in terms of the community standpoint, I think that this, there's much more variables in this situation than Sam takes account of. There's a unique difference in banning e-cigarettes or regulating e-cigarettes because they don't really pose, a huge public health concern. It's more up to an individual basis. I mean, even cigarettes are more heavily regulated due to, secondhand smoke, whereas there's some claims that e-cigarettes don't have those. But there's a big difference in cigarettes and e-cigarettes and marijuana usage publicly. I think that there would be, a huge impact on the community in terms of how to regulate this sort of thing, what sort of norms that we would implement and how we would sort of let this thing happen. And I do think that also he says, there's, no real risk to health and IQ. And I think that ultimately that this is, regardless of this, because we're both citing, claims that say that both it does affect the IQ and that it doesn't. Ultimately, I think that it would affect the community in a negative manner, because we would have to sort of address these problems of people using it, how it would affect the youth. Would the youth use it more often? Public intoxication, anything that comes with alcohol, we would now have to approach because of the legalization of marijuana. And just think about the whole host of problems that come with public intoxication and public alcohol usage. Just multiply that by 2. So
10 seconds.
I think that it would probably negatively affect the community, whereas university probably stay the same.
Thank you. All right, now we're going to ask our second question, which is, in Texas, the possession of marijuana, as stated, is illegal. However, compared to the drugs that are legal, where do you think it ranks? Mr. Cook?
Well, I think that's an excellent question, given the state of questioning whether or not it's addictive, whether or not it's negative for your benefits. Annually in the United States, there are 88,000 alcohol-related deaths, including drunk driving and overdosing. As it relates to cigarettes, there are 480,000 annual deaths from lung cancer and heart disease directly as a result of smoking. And from secondhand smoke alone related to cigarettes, there are 41,000 annual deaths. The annual deaths reported by the CDC are 0 because there's not even a number big enough that they could evaluate to put in their statistics as it relates to deaths related to marijuana. So as it relates to legal drugs, it's much better. Even pharmaceutical drugs that are abused, like over-the-counter, like Benadryl, there are 38,000 annual deaths from overdosing on things like aspirin, sleeping pills, Benadryl, things of that nature that are readily accessible to individuals. Were you able to have something that, I don't know, was not as detrimental to your health as smoking cigarettes or drinking alcohol, you might be able to, I don't know, maybe it would increase the use of that substance. That would probably be the point of legalizing it, but it would allow it to maybe trade off with those other substances. Maybe people wouldn't, get drunk all the time instead, which has much worse health factors than smoking marijuana, given that nearly half the population already smokes it, despite the vast resources we input to try and prevent them from doing so, even when they want to anyways. So I think that people are going to smoke it whether it's illegal or not. They're going to use it whether it's illegal or not. There's just a question of whether or not it's beneficial for everyone to have it legal or to have it illegal.
10 seconds.
Yeah, that's it.
All right. Mr. Hullum, same question.
So yes, that is correct. Every statistic that Sam just cited was absolutely correct. There are 0 deaths from marijuana every year. There are tons of deaths from alcohol, cigarette usage, and all of these other various drugs that he says are legal. But that is what I've been saying this whole time, is that it lures us into feeling comfortable as a society. Sure, from an individual standpoint, we would use it, and there might be no direct health effects. But what would the effect on the society be if we saw the chronic use as an entire society over the course of several decades, several centuries? If it was common use, how would that affect us? But additionally, I do think that there are certain psychological effects that we're overlooking. Marijuana does indeed affect your brain in very unique manners. It affects your brain in ways that other drugs do not, and most of the time, in some cases, they are maleffects. For example,
1 minute.
like I say, it can cause impaired coordination in the short term, which means that the effects on drugged driving, that's a risk. Additionally, it can affect long-term memory. There's evidence that it affects the hippocampus negatively, which can lead to an increase in dementia as well as Alzheimer's later in life. Additionally, as I've indicated, it hurts the development of the youth. That is what I'm going with. There is no impact on the adult population. That may be true, but it would be irresponsible to legalize it, knowing that that may lead to an increase in usage by the youth. That directly would impact their ability. That would directly impact an entire generation's IQ levels, but additionally, it would impact long-term their brains.
10
We
seconds.
don't know the entire effects of marijuana long-term. There's never been a study done that shows the lifelong effects of marijuana, and I'm just saying that it would be irresponsible to legalize it before such a study has been done. Thank you.
All right. And I would like to ask for the audience question. No? Okay. Then I guess the next question that I do have is, if it were legalized, let's just say if it were legalized, how do you think it should be regulated? Should it be regulated by state mandate, or at the federal level? Mr. Cook, you have the first response.
Well, I think that federally would be probably the easiest of those, because if you have half states who have decriminalized it and half states who have legalized it, then someone who moves from Colorado to Texas and tries to get a job and then finds suddenly that marijuana is illegal for recreational purposes, and then they fall into poverty and can't manage to get back to Colorado where they are able to job, it would only cause problems. I think that the uniform consistency that would be allowed based on the legalization at a federal level would be consistent with our policy as it relates to tobacco. We will put big flags on it that say this is bad for your health, and people will still continue to buy it and smoke it, and 500,000 people will die every year from smoking cigarettes because they want to. If they want to do it, they're going to do it anyways, is basically the argument as it's always been. And I think that at a federal level, it would allow for tax revenues that would allow us to create benefits elsewhere for all people, even if that is to the detriment of the people choosing to use it. Those people choose to use it even when it's illegal, even when there's a risk that they could go to prison for using it, which means that there's probably a risk that it's going to continue to happen, whether or not it's federally legalized or not. But if we allow for it to be used in a framework where it's 21 or over, similar to how alcohol is, if it is true that it affects your brain negatively and it doesn't have an impact on adults, then we won't give it to 12-year-olds. The same way that we don't do with cigarettes. You can't smoke them until you're 18 or older, and we've considered you to be an adult and able to make choices for yourself, like smoking a plant that has no medical benefits. Alcohol has no medical benefits, neither does tobacco, yet marijuana has been decriminalized because it has medical uses in solving depression, in solving cancer, in resolving anorexia and bulimia, because it creates artificial appetites, things that are very, very biologically helpful. Could be used to great benefit and would best be done at a federal level, because then all states would be forced to allow it to be used medically at least. Yeah.
All right. Mr. Hullum, same question.
Now, as I've said before, while I do not support a legalization policy, I do support a decriminalization policy due to the positive health effects of marijuana. But in addressing specifically the question, I think that it would probably be best to be regulated by a state level. As I have aforementioned, we see that as regional, societies of people become more in tune with this sort of thing. Like I said, we see the Pacific Northwest legalizing medical marijuana all throughout the early 2000s, which means that the voters reflected that they were willing to engage in this with this sort of thing, that they were willing to accept the risks and that they were willing to address those risks. I think that it would be reckless to pass a federal policy where you have constituents in Texas and in other red states or states that just oppose the use of marijuana, opposing this sort of thing, doing everything that they can to hinder the rollout, which would only affect its efficacy even more. So I think that it would be better for a state level to do it, because then we could see each state legalizing it as they become accustomed to it. That's sort of the thing, is that whenever the society within that state and the voters within that state say that they're willing to accept it, then that also means that they're willing to accept the other risks that are associated with that, and also to address those risks. I think that a federal mandate would just, as I said, just result in sort of a piecemeal rollout where you have it being resisted in some states and everything that they can do to oppose it occurs, whereas a state by state would be much more better, much more efficient, as well as much more safe. So, thank you.
All right. Now, before we go to the closing statements, I would like to ask if we could pull up the polls from beforehand. I forgot to check those, just from beforehand, so we can take a look at those. And while these gentlemen are giving their closing statements, I would also like to remind you guys that as they're giving their closing statements, y'all can text y'all's response about how y'all feel after it. If y'all's stance has changed, if it's the same, we'll kind of look and we'll compare those two. So, Mr. Cook, you have the first to give your closing statement.
I think that one of the things that we've been able to agree upon is that there are medical benefits to marijuana, that if that were to be legalized at a federal level, all states would be forced to require that marijuana could be used in positive medical ways. Doing it state by state, decriminalizing it would simply slow down the process, force people with the need to use medical marijuana to travel to other states, even if they were in fragile health conditions, which means that a federal legalization policy would probably provide the most beneficial way to go about the marijuana debate. Not only would we get the economic benefits of not spending $17.5 billion every single year to make sure that people aren't doing something that they want to do, even though they do it anyways, would probably be reason enough to allow for a federal legalization. But on top of that, I think that the economic benefits that come from getting the tax revenue from the sales, the jobs created for individuals within that industry of roughly 500,000 jobs across all 50 states would probably also be an excellent reason to legalize marijuana, because that depends on the recreational side of this, right? Like, there aren't 500,000 jobs just for medical marijuana. It's for chefs making pastries filled with marijuana that there are jobs for. That's a real thing in Colorado. There are shops literally just filled with donuts filled with marijuana, and they make lots and lots of money. I won my high school stock competition by investing in mobile medical marijuana dispensaries, and that thing shot up. I rest it would have been real money. And I wish that we could legalize it and get all the real money that's already being spent on it. There have been arguments made about how we haven't been doing this for decades. My statistic that we spent $10.2 billion on marijuana was from 2000, a decade and a half ago, which means that the long-term effects of marijuana would be being seen now. Like, we all remember the 70s, or at least learned about the 70s, right? There was lots of medical marijuana usage. There was lots of marijuana usage that had been genetically altered, and the long-term effects of those have not been seen even close to as detrimental as legal drugs like alcohol and tobacco. I think that a federal legalization policy would be net beneficial, not only economically, but medically, and also just give the constituents what they want. Like, this has been very clear that if 92 million people with the United States are willing to do it while it's illegal, that it would only open up a consumer market that would be much larger than that if it was legal. People who would not smoke it while it's illegal would then be allowed to smoke it while it is legal, because they wouldn't fear reparations, being,
You have 1 minute.
arrested and put in jail for doing something that half of the rest of the population is doing anyway. I think this is also indicative that this is the federal policy we're moving towards anyway when Colorado and Washington legalize something that is federally illegal, and then the federal government decides that they're not going to enforce it because they don't have the manpower, because too many people have decided that they desire for marijuana to be legal in a recreational medical purpose, which means that we're moving that direction anyways. People are already using marijuana for multiple purposes. There's just economic benefits that can be reaped from that. We can build more schools. We can fund more people to go to college to learn more about marijuana. We can allow people, if they want to be lobbyists against marijuana, to have research and development funded by the government
15
tax
seconds.
revenue that they get to go to college and then lobby against marijuana if they want to. But I think that the benefits that come from legalizing are definitely better than the detriments that come from forcing it to be illegal.
All right. Mr. Hullum, your closing statement.
Well, the problem is that a lot of people don't remember the 70s. So you can't really say that we learned from it. But in all seriousness, I'm just saying that it would be irresponsible as a state to legalize something that could increase usage by the youth, regardless of whether or not it impacts the youth's ability to, have to maximize their brain capacity or what have you. It is simply irresponsible to show the youth, until the constituents are ready, as I have aforementioned, until they are ready to assume those risks, that it is okay for the youth to be able to use these drugs. I mean, it has a laundry list of effects. I mean, I'm not saying that it would result in anybody's death, certainly not. I agree with all the statistics that Sam says. But I think that we can all agree that there is a risk that it, one, would affect their brain potential, but two, it would affect, perhaps their citizenship grades or their ability to work in class or their motivation or what have you. There is only a risk that it could hurt the youth. And that is why I'm saying it is irresponsible as a federal government or even as a state level to assume those risks until we are truly ready to address those risks. But additionally, I think that this sort of narrow discussion ignores the broader discussion, which we can both agree that there are benefits of marijuana, there are medical benefits, and that the criminalization of marijuana is in fact a problem, that we are wasting money, that there are people that are in dire need of the health benefits of marijuana, and that there are a lot of young men and young women who are in prisons because of the criminalization of marijuana. So I think that while I will favor a decriminalization policy, that a legalization policy would ultimately be irresponsible from a societal standpoint because, well, I've said it enough times. So, thank you.
Applause for our two speakers up here. Thank you both for coming out. And just beforehand, I didn't look at this. My apologies on that. But in favor of marijuana, the recreational usage of marijuana, here, 20 people said that they were for it, and 15 people said that they were against it, and 6 said that they were undecided. And right now, what I can see is the fact that 28 people voted yes, 17 people voted no, and 3 voted undecided. So, as you can tell, it probably sparked new ideas. It probably gave you something a little bit more to think about, and we probably had some more people kind of filter in. But thank you both for coming out, and we are going to switch our panel now to Mr. Professor Eric Lopez and Father Paul R. Key. So again, thank you guys for coming up. I would like to introduce Father Paul R. Key, who is a priest chaplain of St. John Paul II, Catholic Campus Ministries of Tyler. Now, he has an interest in marriage preparation and enrichment, as well as biblical history. So a big thank you for him for coming out. And also Professor Eric Lopez, who is a teacher here at UT Tyler, who is for the allowance of gay marriage. And he's a professor and pre-law advisor in the Department of Political Science and History. And Mr. Lopez, we decided beforehand with the flip of the coin that you will get your opening statement first.
Cool. Can everybody hear me? Everybody good? All right. So first of all, I'd like to thank the Talon for putting this event together and Father Paul for his participation as well. I think one of the things that we take for granted on the college campus is the free exchange of ideas. And so it's vital that individuals are challenged with all sides of an issue, regardless of their position, to help form their opinions. And at the very least, being educated is somewhat important. Okay. So the debate surrounding same-sex marriage is a recent political and social issue. It's fair to conclude that until recently, many people had not even considered the possibility of same-sex marriage, much less the consequences of such relationships. However, as society has changed, our knowledge of what it means to be gay and lesbian has changed as well. No longer do we have laws that criminalize homosexual sexual conduct, but instead we have legal and societal protections that have allowed these relationships to surface. We live in an area where we recognize that the Constitution protects individuals' sexual and moral choices. This leads to the question at the heart of this debate. Should same-sex couples be allowed to marry and enjoy all the rights and responsibilities that government grants to heterosexual couples? For example, by being married, surviving spouses can receive Social Security benefits. Married couples are allowed to take medical leave to care for a sick spouse, and married couples can file joint tax returns and enjoy all the tax benefits that are specific to being married. These are just a few of the thousands of benefits that married couples receive from the government. Now, a key question is whether government, in its capacity of officiating state-sanctioned marriages, should treat homosexuals differently. This distinction is important because this debate is often conflated with religion due to marriage's religious importance and significance. But no serious person is arguing that churches or religions should be forced to perform these ceremonies or recognize these arrangements. The First Amendment rightly protects that from happening. The important question is whether the Constitution forbids government from discriminating against same-sex couples that wish to marry. America's commitment to principles of liberty and equal protection clearly dictate that homosexuals should be entitled to the benefits of marriage. The key to analyzing this debate is dependent upon reading the Constitution, not what a particular majority or religion considers to be morally right. Specifically, there are two clauses in the Constitution that are controlling. The first is the Article 6, which makes the Constitution the supreme law of the land, and the second is the 14th Amendment's guarantee of the equal protection of the laws. First, by making the Constitution the supreme law in our political system, the founders sought to limit the debate about what's legal in our system to those objects listed and protected in the Constitution, not those ideas listed in the Bible or what a majority believe to be a good idea. Within the realm of same-sex marriage, religion has a lot to offer to this debate, but it cannot be the controlling factor in dictating what marriages government should sanction and those it should not. The rules for government and the rights enjoyed by citizens are determined by the guarantees in the Constitution. This leads to a quick analysis of the 14th Amendment's guarantee of equal protection. One of the purposes of the Constitution was to protect individual rights by listing specific rights that were to be withdrawn from the fluctuations of political debate, placing them beyond the potential harms that could be imposed by political majorities. One thing that scared the founders the most were democratic systems in which there was no protection for the minority, leaving their rights up to the people at the ballot box. Indeed, it has been through state-level action in state legislatures that government has prescribed bans on same-sex marriage. This is what took place in Texas in 2005 when voters passed Proposition 2, which amended the Texas Constitution to define marriage as only between one man and one woman. The problem with this, and similar action by a majority of states during this period, is that it violates the constitutional rights of homosexuals. The 14th Amendment's guarantee of equal protection ensures that government at all levels will treat similarly situated individuals equally. More specifically, its guarantee ensures that equal treatment prevails regardless of which groups find disfavor with the prevailing political majority. In a system that prides itself on individual liberty, the constitutional rights of homosexuals to equal treatment must not and cannot be submitted to a vote or be dependent upon election outcomes. The Supreme Court has constantly held that individuals must be free to make personal decisions to marriage free from unjustified government interference. Additionally, any regulation of marriage must respect the constitutional rights of persons. Clearly, bans on same-sex marriage violate the equal protection rights of homosexuals by treating them different for no other reason than the person they choose to marry. If the individual liberty protected by the Constitution means anything, at the very least, it means allowing individuals to make the most intimate and personal choices concerning their dignity and autonomy, free from government interference or what a majority may deem to be moral and right.
All right. Thank you, sir. I'm turning it over to Father Key. Your opening statement.
Thank you very much. I really appreciate our Constitution. I love being American. And furthermore, as a Catholic and as a Christian, we need to be very sensitive to protecting people's rights. But I think we're not really weighing up exactly why it's in the interest of the state itself not to have gay marriage. First of all, gay marriage is not needed because in the sense that homosexuals are fixed in their orientation. I submit to you the example of the wife of the mayor of New York City, Charlene McRae de Blasio, who came out in 1979 as a lesbian with all of the typical standard statements. But then when she met Bill and fell in love with him in 1991, she changed, and she changed her orientations, had 2 kids, and functions well with him. And she said, and I think this is really true, and it's really true in my pastoral practice, that the practice of homosexuality is based more on feeling and conditioning. There's no genetic basis for that behavior. She said in a 1991 article, when a person finds someone she or he is comfortable with, she or he just make it work. And I'd extend that to, if we want to be right with God, we want to do the things that are right with God, and then we make it work. There are some reasons why the equal protection argument is applied except when there's a compelling societal interest. And I would submit to you that the compelling societal interest is the production of children and their education. The traditional understanding and the Christian understanding of marriage is the union of a man and a woman for their good and for the procreation of children and the education of those children. You and I live in a dying culture. Western Europe and the United States are all below replacement value. Significant portions of Europe are going to lose their Christian and their cultural foundation and become Muslim because of the birth rate and the immigration of Muslims, and Christians are not reproducing. I could tell you many stories of what's happening there. In the United States, we're just on the edge. If it were not for the blessed presence of Hispanics, we'd be below reproduction rights. The other part of the argument is simply God. I actually think God is really smart. And I think we have more reasons recently to believe in the reality of the supernatural than we've had in a long time. The near-death experiences, especially Maurice Rawlings' experience as a cardiologist resuscitating a person who thought he was going to hell, very descriptive. Proof of heaven. How much?
2 minutes.
Proof of heaven. I think you've seen the story about the little boy went to heaven and found out about, you have a sister. And his parents had never told him. If you read the book, you find out that he saw the Blessed Virgin Mary there too. That didn't make it into the movie. Another aspect of supernatural reality comes from the occult. And I've got a book by Father Gabriel Amorth. He has written 2 of them, talking about an exorcist tells his story. And he gives examples of doing warfare with supernatural power. If any of these things are true, we've got a dimension of supernatural responsibility, which is why I think the spiritual and the religious foundations have a lot to do. Lee Strobel, whole different side. I used to teach chemistry and physics at John Tyler, got a scientific mind. Lee Strobel gives about 8 different areas of arguments from hard science why there must be a creator, we would explain it that way. Finally, and I brought some copies of this if any of you would like.
You have 1 minute.
I'm known for bringing sheets. Well, I've got a sheet on it which talks about the Bible and homosexuality. While preparing for this, and some of you, if any of you got excited and looked up stuff on Google, you found an article on 6 passages that they try to explain why they don't deal with homosexuality. And I've done up a summary of 9 passages that actually do with the critique of the 6 that they claim don't. And I would argue that the Bible is, this is the problem for us as Christians. The Christian tradition is unanimous on the morality of homosexuality. To make it legal is cooperating in evil and that which is destroying our society, as well as going to what may help to bankrupt our society because of the health problems that go with it.
You have 10 seconds. All right. All right, now let's look at the poll. Right now, 22 people in the room are for the allowance of gay marriage, 12 people are against, and 3 are undecided. And so, Mr. Lopez, you will we'll start off with your response on the first question, and that is, this session, the Supreme Courts have declined to hear cases from several states looking to keep their ban on gay marriage. In the wake of that, same-sex couples are allowed to get married in 32 states. 18 still have bans, one of those being Texas. Why hasn't it been allowed in all states yet?
Why hasn't it been allowed?
In all
Because the
states.
Supreme Court's sitting on their hands. No, I think the simple answer is, it's a great question. No, the simple answer is yes, the Supreme Court. I think if we think about this rationally, our political system doesn't handle these controversial issues very well. I mean, we can't even vote to fund government, much less expect them to vote to say, hey, everybody should marry or not marry. So while I think the legal system plays itself out, that's really the only reason I can give you for why Texas still bans same-sex marriage. And the one thing I do want to say is, I don't believe that people who voted to ban same-sex marriage are animus or hate homosexuals or anything like that. That's the popular political culture here in Texas and many of the states that have banned same-sex marriage, that just homosexual marriage doesn't deserve rights and recognition. I'll go back to my argument. I think what's more important than that is that all people are entitled to equal protection, and that isn't voted on in the ballot box. Now,
All right.
leave it at that.
Father Key.
Sure. I think there are two basic reasons. One is the religious arguments. We are still basically a country that's been founded on Christian presuppositions, and I think a lot of other people think God is really smart, and we learn how God thinks primarily through Scripture, and the witness of that stands without question. The other reason is just anthropological. If you do an anthropological study of all the major cultures of history, homosexuality has never been put in a position where gay marriage was recognized. There's always been homosexuality present in a culture. Never, ever before has gay marriage been recognized. I would submit to you that the fact that we are now proposing that is the fact that we're part of a culture of death, which is in a spiral down. And until we deal with the issue of reproduction, love of children, procreation of children, nurturing of religion, and of faith and of fertility, we're going to be in a decline. I don't want to be in a decline.
You have 1 minute.
I think there are a couple other reasons as people think about this. Number one, the gay practice tends to be loaded with disease. I don't want to get into too graphic a description, but male homosexuality doesn't really work in a healthy manner, okay? If you look at public expenditures, the number one cost to Medicare and Medicaid is for AIDS, which 61% of that is transmitted through male homosexuality. The other thing is the disadvantage it puts traditional families at. If you want to have families where you got a mommy and a daddy and kids, where the mom especially takes care of the kids, that's expensive. You can see in San Francisco where you've got a lot of gay couples, whether or not you have marriage, you've got a lot of gay couples, 2 professional incomes, and no demands on that income except for their own growth and enjoyment. They don't have to take care of kids. And we're entering a death spiral in terms of our population and our attitudes. I think some people understand that.
All right. Mr. Lopez, second question. In the past, the definition of marriage has been defined between a union between a man and a woman. How would you define marriage now? Do you think that the definition has changed?
Yeah, I mean, like I said, there's 2 ways of looking at this. There is the religious aspect. As I've talked to Father Paul, I'm a Catholic. I had a big church ceremony, and I made a commitment to my wife in front of God to love her, and that was cool. But we also had the second ceremony where I signed a document to the state of Arizona saying, this is my partner. Yeah, we agree to, I guess, love each other for all the government benefits. I tell my classes, the biggest tax break I got was when I married my wife, right? And so there's 2 things. And so what's important to keep in mind is marriage at the state and at the non-secular level is just that arrangement between 2 couples to be together. What's important is in the U.S., those arrangements have to respect the constitutional rights of persons. So if we look throughout the history of the U.S., our definition of marriage has changed as society has evolved. We used to ban interracial marriage up until the 1960s because we thought blacks and whites shouldn't marry. We used to ban that women used to have to consent to get married, but we realized, wait a minute, they should probably have a choice in that decision. Just like we're confronted with the similar question today. And I'll leave it at there.
Father Key, what is your stance
Sure.
on the question?
How many of you in here are history majors? Any history majors? I was a history major. I get really uneasy when we start changing things that have never been done in history before. That usually gets us into trouble. And when we start redefining marriage, just because we feel like it, that's a problem. The traditional definition of marriage is that it is a matrimonial covenant by which a man and a woman establish between themselves a partnership of the whole of life, which by its nature is ordered to the good of the spouses and the procreation and education of the offspring. This covenant between baptized persons has been raised by Christ the Lord to the dignity of a sacrament. Now that's for us who are religious, okay? But that definition is fundamental.
1 minute.
What happens if you don't say the definition of marriage is between one man and one woman? Gee, I wonder what else it could be between. Maybe 2 men and a woman? A man and 4 women? That's the Muslim definition. Why should we keep animals out of this? If I love my cat and I want her to be taken care of after I die, I mean, is there any limit to where the definition of legal marriage can go if it's not limited to the one man, one woman for the procreation of children and the bringing up of children?
All right, thank you. And now we have a question from the audience. Hope I can read this. Is the purpose of marriage to support procreation? If so, should we deny marriage benefits to infertile or barren couples? Mr. Lopez, you will have the first take at this.
The simple answer is, like I said, there are spiritual reasons why people get married, and then there is the relationship between a couple and their government. The government does not bar infertile people or elderly people from getting married. Why? Because procreation is one of the various choices a married couple can make. Marriage is not only necessary for procreation. I've been married for 3 years. I don't want kids for another 10. It would be ridiculous to assume that my government would tell me you can't get married till you're ready to have children. That's not a country in which we live in.
Repeat the question.
I will repeat the question. Is the purpose of marriage to support procreation? And if so, should we deny marriage benefits to infertile or barren couples? Now, I know that you mentioned earlier that 2 men and 2 women cannot procreate.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts on this question?
Well, the traditional, and I think the valid definition of marriage as a man and a woman, has 2 purposes: for the good of the spouses and for the procreation of children. Now, we've had a great time talking with my colleague over here. I hope your wife's fertility is still up to it when you want to have kids, because
I'll figure that out when the time comes, I guess.
or it may happen. I mean, fertility is not an automatic, and the Catholic Church would teach there are times for legitimate means and ways to avoid having children, but we really want to encourage people to embrace children and to be generous in the sense of having children. I would argue that you have to have both purposes present. We dare not judge in the case of infertility, or now in the case of impotence, the Catholic Church will not allow marriage to
You have
occur.
1 minute.
But generally, we don't want to make that kind of a decision. But there has to be a real openness and a desire for children and a willingness to make the sacrifices, financial, time-wise, career-wise, everything-wise, in order to raise those children responsibly.
All right. Thank you, sir. Now, before these 2 men, they give their closing statements, I do want to remind you that now is the time. We're going to open up the polls again for y'all to send in y'all's response if y'all's stance has changed, whatnot, and we will take a look at those polls here in a little bit. But Mr. Lopez, you have 4 minutes for a closing statement.
As was mentioned, today, both by judicial decision and democratic action, 32 states allow for same-sex marriage. I think as the judiciary consistently reminds us, our nation's history demonstrates that inclusion strengthens not only our nation but our institutions as well. Our foundational principle that all men are created equal was strengthened when we included African Americans and descendants of slaves into the political system. Our democracy became more vibrant when we guaranteed the right of vote to women, and our educational system improved when we desegregated our schools. If history is any guide, allowing homosexuals to marry can only serve to strengthen that institution as well. Heaven knows Kim Kardashian has done enough to ruin it. I'll leave you with this story, which I think best summarizes what I've been arguing here today. Edith Windsor and Thea Spire were married in Canada and moved to New York, a state that recognized their same-sex marriage. When Spire died, as married couples do, she left her estate to her spouse. The problem was that the federal government at the time did not recognize their marriage. Consequently, when Windsor sought to claim a federal state tax exemption for surviving persons, she was barred from doing so and was ordered to pay the IRS $363,000. If she were a man, or if she had married a man, she would have owed the IRS nothing. For no other reason than that her decision to fall in love with a person of the same sex, her government barred her from equal treatment, reminding her that her relationship in the eyes of the government was not worthy of recognition. The fight over same-sex marriage is not about changing the definition of marriage or forcing religions to marry and recognize these couples. It's a fight over having the government treat same-sex couples with the same respect and dignity that they do heterosexual couples, by offering them the same rights and responsibilities that are attached to state-sanctioned marriage. Certainly, bans on same-sex marriage serve no rational goal. Their only effect is to demean in a public way that homosexual relationships are less worthy. In a speech here at the university, Justice Thomas exclaimed quite proudly that I'm unapologetically pro-American and pro-Constitution. Coincidentally, I feel the same way as an American about our Constitution. I recognize that the same Constitution that protects the free exercise of one's faith in deciding whether to solemnize certain marriages is the same document that prevents government from enforcing the majority's moral and religious beliefs to disadvantage and demean others. Thank you very much for your time here today.
All right, thank you, sir. Father Key, your closing
Thank
statement.
you. Yeah. I would just kind of want to correct my friend opponent, because gay marriage has not been issued by democratic action. In all but 3 of those states, it's been by either federal or state courts. And it's been by court decisions shoved down the throats of voters, even constitutional amendments. Though I was a Catholic and as a Christian would not want to argue that popular vote finally establishes truth. That's why I think God is really smart. But this is not democratic action at this point. Secondly, as I've mentioned, I think there are both health and financial reasons to argue that the state has a compelling reason for defining marriage as between a man and a woman, at least for part of the purpose, is procreating and educating children. The state has a compelling reason for promoting regular marriage, traditional marriage between a man and a woman for the sake of the population. We were in the strange situation of Vladimir Putin lecturing us on homosexuality, contraception, and children, because Russia has been unsuccessful in raising its birth rate. The Chinese are pouring across the Amur River. The Muslims are invading from the southeast. The Russian population is declining, and they are in decline. So I would argue that the state has a compelling interest in this. Finally, we really need to provide material incentives for marriages to have children. That's why those reasons have a compelling, the various tax and other benefits have a reason within the state to be connected to marriage. Most of those can be dealt with otherwise legally by people who want to deal with them. I would submit to you that the real push for gays to be recognized as marriage is they want
You have
more.
2 minutes?
10 seconds.
2 minutes.
2 minutes, I guess.
Yeah.
Still, no, I won't take it. I think there is a reason that gays are pushing to be identified as marriage because they want the moral approval, the religious moral approval of being married. I, again, think God is really smart, and I think there are real consequences, not all of which we see immediately, for maintaining the traditional structure of the family, and I would suggest that we do that.
All right, thank you, sir. And let's take a look at the polls. 22 people, which is the same as we had before, are for the allowance of gay marriage. 15 people are against, and before it was 12, and then 2 are undecided still. Now, I guess this right here is the end of the regulation debate period. For those of you who would like to leave, y'all can. But we thought it'd be a good idea to open up the floor for the audience question, and if y'all have any questions for our 2 debaters here, as well as I will invite Sam Cook back up to the podium, or the stand as well, to defend his stance on the legalization of marijuana. And just ask, if y'all have any questions and y'all would like to ask them, we thought it'd be a good time to just start a conversation that way. So, Mr. Cook. Does anybody have any questions? Awesome.
I have one
Okay.
question.
Yes, sir.
I actually have a question.
right.
How does the religious definition of a covenant between a man and a woman deal with transsexual and transgender individuals? Are they men and women, or are they it's?
Well, you have to look at the situation and the evidence. And there are very few people in which it's really confused, maybe 1 out of 100,000. Situations like that have got to be looked at. You've got the strange situation where you'll have guys who claim that they are women. Sometimes you wonder if they do that just so they can get in the women's restrooms. We're going to have riots over that one. So I think there's a lot in the definition. The population that you're talking about, I think, is very small. Doesn't change God's moral laws.
Well, then, I guess as a follow-up to that, I just would ask if the Bible provides a definition of what a man is.
Yeah, the canon law does too. And basically, he's got a penis that works, and a woman's got a vagina that works, and they have to be able to get them together.
So I guess the follow-up question to that would be, if a woman is infertile, is then she no longer a woman because her vagina doesn't work?
Actually, other parts don't work than the vagina. But you can't determine that, and because, I mean, you can determine she's a woman if that's the way she's built. And we believe that a person needs to be respected and treated as what they are. So you don't, I mean, the church is not going to make that judgment on infertility. Plus, it's really dangerous to make that judgment on infertility. I'll tell you, my son and his wife thought they were going to have trouble having kids when they got married. They got 8.
All right. Now, a question that we have from the audience is right here is actually for you, Mr. Cook. What do you think about marijuana being a gateway drug along with alcohol and tobacco? Should we legalize it just because the other two are?
I guess I interpret that question as like, is marijuana a gateway drug or more of a gateway drug than alcohol and tobacco? I would think that that's dependent on whether or not you believe that 92 million Americans already smoke marijuana. Because 92 million Americans don't do cocaine or heroin or other harder drugs, but they do drink alcohol because they feel as though that is less detrimental, more available because it's legal. I think that alcohol and tobacco are certainly gateway drugs because they're, more dangerous because they are touted as being better than marijuana by being legalized. There becomes a spotlight on what it seems to be socially and publicly acceptable via cigarettes and alcohol versus marijuana, which we put a taboo on for seemingly no reason from my perspective. But I think that as far as it goes for being a gateway drug, that kind of thing is inevitable to a point, because if you're going to do harder drugs, you will do harder drugs. Just like if marijuana is illegal and half of the population still smokes it, means that the individuals who do cocaine and other heroin, other forms of hard drugs will still continue to do those. But I think that the benefits of legalizing marijuana would be better, specifically because we could put $17.5 billion that we spend trying to prevent marijuana from happening into trying to prevent cocaine from getting through our borders, which is very, very medically detrimental. There's no medical benefits to it. So I think that it would still be net beneficial even if it is a gateway drug.
All right. And
I got a question for him.
okay.
Let me stand up so I can see you. It's on marijuana. I had 2 questions. Number one, when I told my secretary that I was coming for a debate, and the earlier debate was going to be marijuana, she happens to work at the neonatal clinic at Trinity Mother Frances. She blew her lid because she said, you should see the children who come. Preemie births and defects in the children because of the marijuana the women have been smoking. Now, that's not a scientific study. I wonder if you could respond to that. The other question, I was really intrigued by your argument, and you repeated it twice, that there are 0 deaths reported from marijuana. Now, let me just ask, normally to inhale marijuana, one lights a cigarette type thing. One inhales the smoke that comes from the combustion and holds it in the lungs to get the marijuana, right?
There are other methods, but that's one of them.
That's one of them. You could eat, otherwise you get everything in it. You think that that's safe compared to tobacco? A long time ago, when I was younger, and they were doing research on this, they said that there was at least as much, if not more, carcinogens in a marijuana cigarette than a tobacco cigarette.
First, to address the issue as it relates to neonatal problems that result as a result of marijuana, I think that the comparative example I would give to counter that is that alcohol results in, that biological studies have been done that indicates that alcohol would likely result in almost immediate brain damage were it to be consumed by a female who happened to be pregnant, which we consider, which we allow because it's traditional, because it was something that we've always done, so we just thought that it was still okay despite the negative aspects of it. So I think that legalization would still be net beneficial because individuals who are smoking marijuana, even while it's illegal, will probably continue to do that regardless. But also that there are legal drugs in the status quo that would be worse for those kinds of conditions. I haven't read any studies as it relates to the neonatal effects of pregnant women smoking marijuana. I would hope that individuals who were pregnant would read the warning labels that are inside every bathroom, even men's bathrooms, that say that if you are pregnant, you should not drink alcohol or smoke tobacco, which I don't. But as it relates to how burning a marijuana, we've mentioned before that there are edibles. You know, you can eat donuts instead, and those don't have the same carcinogens. But yeah, donuts, cupcakes, yeah, fudge. But also, if people are willing to light a joint, that means they are probably also willing to light cigarettes. Cigarettes are probably worse because the pesticides that big agricultural companies, big tobacco companies use are put on those particular drugs are one of the worst parts of it. The carcinogens within marijuana are not nearly as bad because it's not the same amount of tar and pesticides and all the genetic modifications that we do to those plants to try and make them better. Marijuana, as it is, as a medical strain, is just a plant grown 100% naturally, which means it would actually be net beneficial to smoke marijuana versus tobacco. But also the medical benefits that come for patients who have anorexia, bulimia, cancer, all the other
30
conditions
seconds.
that marijuana can be used to assist with would be far more beneficial than the potential for lung cancer, which I guess is the argument from marijuana. It would take much longer for marijuana to result in that kind of detriment, if it does at all, than it would for cigarettes, which is a legal drug, and much longer than for the liver disease and other failures that come with consuming alcohol.
All right, thank you. I have a question for Mr. Lopez. In Father Key's closing statement, he kind of addressed some points that he thought you missed the mark on. And one of the things that he said is, I'm paraphrasing here, but gay marriage being crammed down the throats of voters. What are your thoughts on that?
I would say this. We have an independent judiciary that's there to ensure that the majority cannot tyrannize the minority. The specific purpose of the judiciary is to uphold the rights of all people, whether they be minority, whether they be in the majority, whatever they may be. So this idea that it's being rammed down their throats, I would pull back. The judiciary is there for that specific purpose, to ensure that the majority cannot ram down everything. If you read Federalist 10, Madison explains, democratic society scared the hell out of them. They were turbulent because there were no protection for the minority. The majority just did whatever they want, tyrannized them. It was incompatible with personal security, etc. This is why we have an independent judiciary. For the ramming part, I could imagine being the minority where your rights are being voted on at the ballot box. I would be more offended at that than a judiciary upholding the rule of law and the Constitution, saying that your government has a right to treat you equally. Now, to his point, here in Texas, 78% of voters banned gay marriage. That was 17% of Texas's population. So it was 78% of 17%, not this wide majority of Texans, I think, believe that. And the other thing to keep in mind is, if we just look at public opinion now, support for same-sex marriage is about at the mid-50s and continues to rise. So this idea that's being rammed down, I think it's a bit of an over-exaggeration, but I get it.
Father Key, your rebuttal to that.
I would just hope that the independent judiciary was always that independent and that clear on the Constitution.
This is true.
Okay, all right. Father Key, I will ask a question to you. This right here is from our audience. Will the legalization of gay marriage increase the number of gay individuals?
Will the legalization of gay marriage increase the number of gay individuals? It will certainly lead to the option of same-sex activity, and I think it will increase those who are conditioned to gay behavior. I've studied a fair amount the origins of why people will end up with the feelings of being gay or otherwise, and it's pretty much a result sometimes of very complex conditioning. A lot of times it occurs during the adolescent years. I think if it's allowed as permissive behavior, an increasing number of people will get conditioned that way, which will make even more difficult the lives of traditional families raising and paying for children.
All right. Professor Lopez, you look puzzled. What are your thoughts on that?
Gay marriage hasn't affected my relationship or my idea about having children or anything. So I find the argument hard that gay marriage would trample on traditional, I mean, I get the traditional values argument, but I think for the most part, I think we can all agree we just like to be left alone, and probably a good stance to keep in mind.
All right. Another audience question. Father Key, you say that the groundbreaking acceptance of gay marriage is cultural death. Would you say it was also cultural death when slavery was abolished for the first time?
No, the abolishment of slavery was something that the Christian tradition looked for ever since the time of St. John Chrysostom. Slavery is a very objectionable imposition of will on people. To free people from slavery is good. From the Christian point of view, gay sexual activity is sinful. So it's the opposite. Does that make sense? I think they're two different things. I was an activist in the civil rights movement. I was marching, I was protesting, I was doing voter registration, and I was about 150 feet from Martin Luther King when he gave his I Have a Dream speech. I was involved in that also because of my Christian commitment to decency and fairness, because the kind of discrimination that was present in this country, both against blacks and Hispanics, was horrible. Completely illegitimate, and we had to do something about it. I see it as a completely different issue because on the one hand, I mean, being black, being gay, being white, none of that is being a sin. Hopefully it's a gift. From the Christian point of view, the practice of homosexual activity is sinful, bad, and destructive.
All right. Professor Lopez, do you have any comments on this question as well?
I think there's, at the end of the day, me and Father Paul had this conversation. I'm a Catholic and I have my own views and stuff, but then I got to separate that and realize what can government rightly be able to punish and regulate. We're talking about gay marriage, and a lot of those ideas come from our ideas about religion. I think just what I find the slippery slope is, should we then be punishing premarital sex? I would guarantee that about 80% of us here would be in jail if we started banning those types of activities. And so it's a real slippery slope when we only rely upon religion or what we believe to be morally right and wrong to discriminate against or punish certain individuals.
All right. Thank you. Another audience question is, I'm going to start with Professor Lopez. This right here is on the topic of gay marriage. In the debate of legalization of gay marriage, how does your religious belief or spiritual background guide you in your stance, or does it at all?
It's tough as shit. No, I'm joking. No, it really is. It's one of those things. But as I tell my students, government is prohibited, right? That we have a constitution that prohibits government from interfering on free exercise or from establishing a religion or to favor a particular religion or doctrine. And so when I look at this issue, when we talk about same-sex marriage, I think a lot of us conflate this, that the church is, I told Father Paul, if the government ever told Catholics you got to marry gays, I would stand at the door with him, right? That's not what we're talking about. What we're talking about is tax breaks. It's benefits associating with marriage. It's just simple stuff that heterosexuals are given from their government. And so at the end of the day, when I think about what is a more just and perfect society, it's government's recognition that everybody is equal, everybody has dignity, and everybody's entitled to equal protection from their government at the very least.
All right. Father Key, what is your response?
I think that's a really good question, because I started out at the age of most people here as pretty much a total secularist. I didn't believe in anything supernatural. I even became a Protestant minister without believing in anything supernatural. And I've kind of gone through life. I'm now 70 years old. I've been around a lot of bushes, okay? And every time I go around the bush, I come around thinking God is actually smarter. The number of times in which I have seen what I would call biblical truth actually end up valid is just shocking. And therefore, I'm probably now more open than ever to what I would read as the biblical, traditional, historical witness to morals and values. And I would argue that our government, our way of government, is essentially founded on having a Christian moral outlook with all of the virtues and restraints in it. I got a couple of books that they'll go back to the Founding Fathers that describe that. I am very uneasy about us being so eager to embrace something that no other culture has ever embraced. And so I would say that at my age and at this time with my experience, I'm much more inclined to want to be graciously but vigorously a supporter of Christian values. And I think they bring happiness, I think they bring stability, and they certainly bring a future.
All right. And last question, I will direct this to Father Key, and then I will also open it up to Professor Lopez as well. This right here was directed towards you, and it says, Father Key, what I got from your argument is that you believe the dominant Christian legitimacy will be broken if gay marriage is legalized. Can you affirm or deny?
Yes, I agree. And I think I would make the point that if we as a culture legalize gay marriage, and if you want, I've got copies here of a Bible study that gives that and some of the historical background. This is one of the things that is utterly, totally clear in the Christian history. If, as a culture, we reject that which is really, really that clear, can there be anything else that is held with security? And Alexander Solzhenitsyn, who suffered under the Russians, under the communists, he said that when God is dead, everything is permitted. Now, for a while, everything is permitted is kind of nice, because then we get freedom, don't we? We're able to do things. But finally, when everything is permitted, that means the rule of the strong without constitutional protections, without the protections we have in this country, and you get a Hitler, you get a Stalin, you get dominant governments because the strongest person gets the power. There has to be, I mean, if you don't have the rule of law, and like I think you would consider the Declaration of Independence as kind of an extension on the Constitution.
Sure.
On what are our freedoms based? We are endowed by our Creator with certain basic values. If you take the Creator out of that, everything becomes relative, and you have the rule of the strongest, which in the long run, I don't think works.
Right, but the next line of the Declaration is we're all entitled to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. So
Yes.
those bans seem to contradict that same sentence. But
Oh, no, wait, they don't contradict. See, because if you say they're endowed by our Creator, then we have to understand them in the context of the Creator's plan, which is why everything is not permitted.
fair enough.
All right, well, I guess to elaborate more on that, what are your thoughts directly on this question? Could it affect the legitimacy of Christianity if gay marriage was legalized?
No, I mean, we're talking about, at the end of the day, what benefits and rights and responsibilities does government give to its citizens? If you feel, right, that your faith, that your religion is under assault from the government expanding opportunities and freedoms to other people, I don't see it. That's just my view on that. My stance. Yeah, I'll leave it at that.
And the issue really is there a compelling interest to make that kind of a discrimination, to give special support to marrieds who can generally reproduce as opposed to other groups? And that's the issue of the debate. Is there a compelling interest to do that? I would argue there is. My friend would probably argue there's not.
So if you read the court cases, this thing has been brought up. One, this bans on same-sex marriage strengthen traditional marriage. The courts have said, get out of here. That doesn't make any sense whatsoever. How does banning same-sex marriage elevate and strengthen traditional marriage? There's no connection. The second argument has been, look, this is traditionally and morally what we've always done. That's the interest. Well, no, traditionally and morally we allowed polygamy for a while, and we allowed blacks and whites not to get married. Those things change. The last argument which you bring up is about the kid argument, that kids are best raised with a man and a woman. Every legitimate social science journal has said, no, that's not the case. And if we just think about this weekend, any one of you can engage in sexual activity and get pregnant. That's one of the blessings of being heterosexual. Homosexuals don't have that option, just by definition, that, as Father Paul has brought out to us. So that means when they beget that decision of whether or not to have a child, they actually have to think about it. This weekend, you have a couple beers, you're not thinking about that decision, right? Homosexuals have to undertake that decision of, is this in our best interest? Do we have the financial stability? Are we going to be willing to raise this kid? And so every social science study has shown that because they have to make that decision, those kids are no more different than kids that are raised in a heterosexual family. And so court by court by court that have heard all of these arguments have said the only thing at the end of the day that people who want to ban same-sex marriage are relying on is tradition, morality, and religion, and that alone is not a reason to ban stuff. So one of the things I pointed out in my opening, right, up until about 2003, Texas criminalized homosexual sexual behavior, right? If a cop saw homosexuals having sex, they could be thrown in jail. And so when this went to the court, Texas was saying, well, this is the majority's disapproval of homosexual conduct, and the court said, look, you can't just ban stuff because of a majority's disapproval to a certain activity. And at the end of the day, I think having studied all these various court cases, that's the only thing the courts are taking seriously is this idea about morality, and that's not sufficient, I think, in my view, and in a lot of courts' views, to ban same-sex marriage altogether.
All right, Father Key.
Sorry, I got to contradict you because all the studies don't come out that way. In particular, there's a professor, Regeneris, at UT Austin that did the widest, broadest-based data study on children in homosexual relationships. He had a couple problems. One was he couldn't find enough lesbian couple. You have very few male couples with children. He couldn't find enough lesbian couples that were stable to actually measure the effect on the kids over that period of time. And he said that you had to compare the children of lesbian couples with those where there's been a divorce or a loss of a parent. That caused quite a fuss at UT Austin. He was attacked. All of his resource materials were impounded. The faculty did a study on his study and came back and said, this is legitimate, your methods were correct.
So a district court judge in Michigan, when they heard the ban, he was called to testify. And he had all the rights and all the protections of a trial. And the district court judge, in their opinion, that struck down Michigan's ban said that researcher cannot be taken seriously. So there are serious flaws with his study that I would counteract to you.
But the faculty at UT Austin couldn't find him, apparently.
Maybe.
But the judge could. Oh, do you think he could have had an agenda?
Well, he was appointed by Reagan, so you figure that agenda out.
And on that note, we'll
it.
close. Again, I just want to say thank you to our debaters. I really appreciate you guys coming out, and I hope you guys out there, because everybody else left, I hope that you guys out there, you were able to learn something and maybe change your stance on a thing or reaffirm it. So again, I just want to thank everybody and go forth, and I hope if we do this again, you guys come back. Thank you.